My people, sons and daughters of Helghast, the time has come for the truth of tyranny to be told and how the world as we know it now came to be. It began in the solar year 2050. Earth had become nearly uninhabitable after nuclear war broke out over control of scarce resources. In response, a coalition of Earth's governments and richest companies formed the United Colonial Nations and began a colonization program in order to seek out natural resources to support the human race. The closest star to that of the Earth's was Alpha Centauri. In the year 2111, a UCN exploration ship reached Alpha Centauri and found one planet as a prime candidate for colonization. A fleet of colony ships headed for Alpha Centauri were lost to a freak solar flare, thus leaving the UCN financially crippled and unable to fund another interstellar colonization mission. The hopes of the UCN were dashed out of pure desperation. The UCN sold the settlement right for Alpha Centauri to the Helghast Corporation. The corporation claimed the two habitable planets. The first they called Vector, a rich Earth-like planet named after Helghast Corporation's CEO Philip Vector, and Helghast, a barren yet resource-rich planet named after the corporation. By the end of the 22nd century, Alpha Centauri became a service hub for passing starships on course for Earth and its colonies. Starships came to Helghast to be supplied, maintained and refueled, and bringing vital energy resources that command top prices to the colonies. As a result, the Helghast Corporation established itself as a civil administration and taking over all local administration duties from the USEN, levy taxes against the entire population, and reorganize all social services. This left the Helghast administration free to tax and invest in their colonies as they wished, as they charged each ship that passed through Alpha Centauri, while Helghast-based ships are granted a residence permits that frees them from many charges, encouraging some shipping companies to relocate. As a result of Helghast's independence and exploitation over star travel and space trade, areas which were traditionally under UCN control angered the UCN, who, in response, levied stricter controls and tariffs on all space traffic and increased their taxes on the colonies to expand the UCN. The regulations also rescinded the Helghast administration's rights to a large home fleet and tariffs on shipping. The Helghast administration refused to follow the regulations. Both the Helghast administration and the UCN began negotiations over the regulations, but the Helghast and their wealthy members refused to budge on the issues of tariffs or self-defense. By 2199, negotiations over a mutual compromise between the Helghast and the UCN broke down. The Helghast refused to follow Earth's demands for their compliance and instead declared their secession from Earth, becoming an independent colony. Helghast's military began expelling all UCN forces from Vector and Helghast, forcing skirmishes to break out on and around the two colony worlds. Despite the Helghast military outnumbering the UCN forces known as the ISA, they were under-equipped, poorly trained and inexperienced, allowing many ISA forces to escape the initial fighting and conducting hit-and-run operations from hidden bases. This marked the start of the first extrasolar war. Back on Earth, the UCN considered enforcing an embargo on all trade with Helghast, but deemed it to be counterproductive. The Helghast would simply prevent trade ships from reaching Earth, in the knowledge that Earth cannot survive for any length of time without colonial resources. They dispatched a powerful fleet to Alpha Centauri to crush the Helghast and restore their authority over the survivors. The fleet arrived in 2201 and effortlessly decimated Helghast customs service ships around planet Helghast and Vector. The conflict ended within a year, forcing the Helghast administration into unconditional surrender. In the aftermath, the UCN replaced the corporate government of Vector with one loyal to Earth, while also sending a silent warning to the other colonies of never daring to challenge the UCN's authority. Shortly after Vector was placed under Earth's rule, Helghast extremists began a terrorist campaign in an attempt to make the occupation of Vector too expensive. Vector became a planet of civil unrest and violence as the UCN responded by harshly suppressing the local Helghast population and making life harder for the Helghast in general. The unrest ended when the Helghast people decided to resettle on planet Helghast. The UCN agreed to their request and allowed millions of disaffected Helghast to leave on colony ships for planet Helghast, no longer wishing to deal with future issues that were guaranteed to arise from a rebellious population living on a hellish planet. The USCN gave the Helghast independence and left the people on their own to suffer from the planet's harsh environment. Life for the resettled Helghast was dismal and harsh. The planet itself was poison to them, the air was toxic. Many died from illness, storm damage and starvation before the death rate finally subsided, and they began to adapt to their surroundings. In the year 2220, they reformed their administration and rebuilt their civilization. They began to profit from their trade of natural minerals, but were subjected to harsh trade sanctions in which the UCN largely profited off. By the early 24th century, the third generation of indigenous Helghast were born, and they were genetically conditioned to the harsh environment, such as having lungs that are more efficient against pollutants and cells that are more resistant to high radiation. In the solar year 2330, a great economic depression disrupted Vector and Helghast due to Vector's monopoly of the Helghast trade at the expense of reinvestment on Helghast. Without reinvestment, they were unable to maintain the expensive machinery that mined the planet's natural resources, leading to major industrial accidents. The economic downturn lasted for almost 20 years, in which Helghast citizens started to die of starvation, while Vector could not spare any relief effort due to having their own economic problems. The Helghast directed their anger on the Vectans for the cause of their misery and misfortunes. This allowed a charismatic politician, Scholar Vizari, to take advantage of the Helghast people. Vizar heavily promoted his ideology that the Helghast people are a new evolved species superior over humanity, deeming themselves as Helghast. The people, both rich and poor alike, rallied to Vizari and supported his ideology of their supremacy that will bring them back as a great nation. In 2347, Vizari faked an attempt on his life in order to garner public support to overthrow the Helghast administration. He led a military coup and assumed power over Helghast. Under his reign, the Vizari administration defied the UCN embargo and began to trade directly to black market suppliers on Vector and other colonies. The Vectans were unwilling and uninterested to enforce the embargo, as they felt it was unnecessarily needed. This allowed the Helghast to recover from the depression after Helghast secured a contract with the ICSA for energy and materials. In turn, Vizari used Helghast's new wealth to fund and enlarge their military with the intentions of conquering Vector and rebuild the Helghast Empire. The UCN were complacent in the face of Helghast's resurgence. As they lost interest in enforcing the blockade and deemed expanding their aging navy to be too expensive, they instead relied on constructing an orbital defense network to protect Vector from Helghast aggression. The Helghast, however, secretly infiltrated the UCN's command structure and gained allies from Helghast sympathizers to sabotage Vector's defenses. And so the stage was set for the Second Extrasolar War. In August 2357, the Helghast launched an invasion of Vector. The defense network was instantly shut down by Helghast sympathizer General Stuart Adams before they could fire on the invading fleet, which they bypassed without interruption and landed their troops on the planet. As the forces were caught off guard and thousands were killed in the initial fighting. They desperately tried to restore the defense network while waiting for UCN reinforcements. However, they were manipulated into giving control of the defense network to the Helghast under General Adams, who planned on using the defense network to destroy the UCN reinforcements. The conflict on Vector saw mass casualties on both sides. Despite the UCN losses, a team of 4 unlikely heroes, led by future war hero Jan Templar, prevented Vector City from falling to the Helghast and killing General Joseph Lente, the commander of the Helghast invasion. Templar's team also managed to stop Adams from destroying the UCN fleet by sabotaging the defense network and allowing the UCN to destroy the network and killing Adams. With that, the Helghast were repelled back to Helghast, where they began to prepare for the inevitable counter-invasion from the soon-to-arrive UCN fleet. In 2359, the ISA launched their counter-invasion of Helghast. Battle Group Mandrake, under the command of now Colonel Jan Templar, descended into Helghast's thick atmosphere. Their aim was to attack the capital city, Pirahus, and capture Scholar Vizari. bringing a swift end to the war. The Helghast fiercely and fanatically defended their capital. The ISA advance was temporarily hindered by arc towers until discovering their power source outside of the city. However, Templar's flagship, the New Sun, came under attack by Helghast forces under Colonel Mael Radek, who fatally wounded Templar and took nuclear launch codes for the stolen Red Dust nuclear weapons. Before dying, Templar's last actions was directing the New Sun into crashing the Petracy power grid and depowering the city's defenses. While the ISA were provided an opening to resume their advance and take Vizari's palace, the Helghast used a Red Dust nuclear warhead to annihilate the bulk of the ISA invasion force in the city. Only a small contingent, under the command of Captain Jason Narville, who were outside of the city and conducting rescue operations, were spared from the nuclear explosion. The surviving ISA forces launched a desperate attack on Vizari's palace. After a brutal battle, the Helghast fell back to the palace and Colonel Radek was killed. Vizari himself was confronted by Alpha Squad members Thomas Sevchenko and Rico Velasquez and was about to be placed under arrest. But unfortunately, Velasquez impulsively gunned down Vizari and preventing the ISA from ending the war. In his final words, Vizari cried out, "Madness!" And he was right, for madness was to follow. Soon after Vizari's death, Helghast forces mounted a surprising and devastating counterattack that forced the ISA into retreat while destroying many ISA ships. The evacuation left many soldiers stranded on Helgen and at the mercy of the vengeful Helghast. Thereafter, the Vectan government agreed to a ceasefire with the Helghast. 6 months after Vizari's death, a power struggle was fought between Admiral Orlok and the very well-spoken Chairman Johann Stahl of Stahl Arms over who would succeed Vizari. Stahl wanted to prove himself as Vizari's worthy successor by producing powerful irradiated Petraceed weapons and use them to bombard Earth and forcing the UCN to capitulate. Rivalry between Vizari's would-be successors escalated into open violence when Orlok was declared as the new autarch, whom wanted Stahl's weapons at the cost of the chairman's life. As civil war broke out between the forces loyal to Orlok and Stahl, the ISA remnants hijacked Helghast strike fighters and destroyed Stahl's flagship, stopping it from reaching Earth. The flagship's destructive payload was then detonated over Helgon, irradiating the entire planet and obliterating the remains of the Helghast invasion fleet destined for Earth. The ISA remnants escaped from the devastation and made their way back to Vector. The Second Extrasolar War ended with the devastation of planet Helgon, known as the Terracide. The UCN brokered a tentative truce with the surviving Helghast population and allowing them to resettle on Vector, where they claimed one half of the planet as New Helgon. The war did not end the eternal hatred between the Vectans and Helghast, especially the latter, who held the Vectans being responsible for the Terracide. As a result, Vector was literally divided by a planet-spanning barrier known as the Wall. By 2390, Vector and New Helgon are in a Cold War state. This uneasy coexistence fuels resentment, hatred, and violence between the two groups. On one side, the Vectans view the Helghast as dangerous intruders. On the other, the Helghast harbor bitterness over their treatment as second-class citizens and their homeworld's destruction. As tensions rise, terrorist attacks orchestrated by rogue Helghast elements escalate the situation. While not all Helghast support violence or a return to war, it became clear that both sides were engaged in covert operations that threatened the fragile truce. Shadowy figures within the ISA and Helghast leadership manipulate events to justify open war. Their UCN agents discover a secret Helghast plot involving a superweapon powered by Petraceed, the volatile energy source from Helgen. The weapon could destroy the Vectan half of the planet, effectively wiping out the ISA. However, these agents also discover that the ISA has been conducting unethical experiments on captured Helghast, using them as test subjects for their own weapons program. In a rare turn of events, ISA and Helghast operatives joined forces to prevent the escalation of war and the deployment of the superweapon. Together, they worked to dismantle the plans of the extremist factions on both sides. However, their partnership is fragile. and shortly after the death of the UCN agent at the hands of his own. A brave lone Helghast sniper fired the first shot in the Third Extrasolar War. But sadly, my people, this is as far as our story goes. I hope I can tell you the rest of this tale one day. For now we must endure, as we have always endured. When the dust has settled, it will be the Helghast who rise victorious. Until next time, goodbye.